1st and 2nd Samuel. The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel were originally one long book. They tell the events in the lives of one prophet and two kings of Israel, and are divided at the death of the first king. The prophet is Samuel. His mother was Hannah. Hannah was barren, and wept and prayed much that the Lord would give her a son, promising to the priest Eli that she would give him back to the Lord. She conceived and bore Samuel. When he was 3, she kept her word and presented him to the Lord to live and serve him for his whole life. Hannah's beautiful prayer then is recorded in chapter 2, and among its verses she declares, "There was no one holy like the Lord. There was no one beside you. There is no rock like our God." In much the same way as God used Moses to mold his people into a nation, he chose and used Hannah's son Samuel to inaugurate the period of kingship for Israel. At this time, Eli's 2 sons were unfaithful in their ministry as priests and had no regard for the Lord. Also, the neighboring Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is where Moses had met with God, and which is where God was enthroned. It was a time when God's people were ceasing to trust him as their king and ruler. Samuel warned the people that having a king such as their neighbors had would only bring hardship, but they insisted, and God let them have a king. His name was Saul. Samuel anointed him as king according to God's command. Saul was 30 when he became king, and he reigned for 42 years. Although Saul led Israel in victory over the Philistines, he later displeased God by holding back the choice livestock after a battle with the Amalekites, in which he had been commanded by God to completely destroy the Amalekites and all their possessions. When confronted by Samuel, Saul denied keeping the livestock. One of the best responses in the Bible is Samuel's response to Saul in 1 Samuel 15. "If you have completely obeyed, destroying all their possessions, including the livestock, then what is this bleating of sheep that I hear in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle I hear?" Saul insisted what he had done was right. He was going to use the livestock to sacrifice to God. But partial obedience isn't obedience at all. It is just convenience. So Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." And that was it. God was grieved that he had made Saul king over Israel, for Saul had no heart for God. And God sent Samuel to anoint another king. This king was from Bethlehem. He was a shepherd, the youngest of 8 sons of Jesse, and his name was David. His great-grandparents were Ruth and Boaz. The Lord chose David over his brothers, saying that he does not look at the outer appearance as a man does, but that he looks at the heart. Throughout his life, whether in victory or defeat, or success or failure, David proved himself to be a man after God's own heart. His story is told beginning in 1 Samuel 16 and ends at 1 Kings 2. It is also told from 1 Chronicles 11 through 29, since the Chronicles books parallel the events recorded in 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. By the time you've read this far in the Bible, you have probably come to realize that these people are just like you and me. And King David is no different, except that in every situation, his love for God drives him to praise, to victory, or to repentance. Since God's primary command is to love him, a look at David can be instructive and encouraging for us all. Probably one of the most well-known stories about King David is David and Goliath. You can read about the account of that battle in 1 Samuel 17. The nation of Israel was at war with the Philistines, a warlike people who lived to the west of Israel in present-day Palestine. The Philistines were once again at war with Israel. Every day for 40 days, the Philistines sent forth Goliath, a frightening warrior over 9 feet tall. Day after day, he stepped out of camp and terrified the Israelites by shouting to them that there was no one in Israel who could defeat him. Young David came into camp and claimed that with the power of the God of Israel, he would defeat Goliath. The Israelites strapped on heavy armor to protect David, but he just could not adjust to the weight. So he took it off, and with his faith in the power of God as his only armor, he took a stone in his slingshot, ran full speed toward Goliath, and struck him right between the eyes, killing him. The Philistines were then defeated by Israel. King Saul began to be jealous of David as people sang songs about Saul killing thousands, but David killing 10,000. Trying to kill David, Saul pursues him at length throughout the hills of Israel. David wrote poetry even during these times, crying out to God for his protection, justice, and mercy in his times of need. These are recorded in the book of Psalms, found later in the Old Testament. As David was being pursued, with his own life in danger from Saul, he came upon Saul in a cave, unaware that he was being watched. It was the perfect opportunity for David to kill Saul and end his own persecution, but he didn't do it. Saul had been anointed by God as king over Israel, and David refused to strike God's anointed. So he quietly cut off a corner of Saul's robe as proof that he was that close and yet had spared Saul's life. King Saul died, and David was crowned king. This is the event that separates the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel from each other. After David was crowned king, he began establishing his authority over the whole kingdom, eventually making Jerusalem the center of government. It is known as the City of David still today. After David's reign was established, he desired to build a temple for God to replace the tent where the Ark of the Covenant was. But God replied through Nathan the prophet that he had not asked for a temple to be built by David, and that, in fact, he would establish a dynasty for David. That promise or covenant with David is recorded in 2 Samuel 7, verses 8 through 16. The bottom line is that God promised David that his son would succeed him on the throne and that his house would have the right to rule Israel forever. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of these promises, as he is a direct descendant of King David. There are many victories in David's life recorded in the Bible, but there are also his failures. 2 Samuel 11 tells the story of his adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband. For some time he did not admit his sin. Finally, when confronted by Nathan, he cried out to God in confession and repentance to him. Psalm 51 records his cry to God and remains one of the most accurate descriptions of the effects of unconfessed sin and the results of forgiveness and restoration ever written. God forgave David, but because he had been a man of bloodshed, he was not permitted to build a temple for God. That privilege was given to his son, Solomon.